are there some things as you've grown up that you have actually come to understand about men that are revelationary for you?
If you asked me what is a 13-year-old or 15-year-old boy now being told what is a positive thing to go out and do, I don't know that I could tell you.
No.
Because I think everything comes with like baggage.
I never realized until we started talking more about safety, like how hyper-vigilant I am to male tone of voice.
Maybe we should all be wary of them. I don't know.
Red flag.
Red flag.
Oh my God, total red flag.
Are we being really horrible right now? I don't know. Hi, I'm Christina Rhodes.
And I'm Tempest Rose.
We are two millennial women 4 decades in.
We're revisiting the culture that made us, with a little more hindsight.
And a lot less bullshit.
We've made our own rules.
Built our own spotlights.
And we're here to speak our minds without playing dumb.
And without playing nice.
This is the second part of our chat about men and women. We've talked about women already. Today we're going to talk about men. I guess you might want to listen to the women episode first.
Well, I guess we see how we go. I would also say it's not men versus women. We're not trying, this is like you were saying this before, like part of this conversation is also around we need each other. We must live harmoniously together.
Well, this is the fact. So, as I know you are aware, but I don't know how much our listeners are aware, but Gen Z are not finding a common accord between men and women at all. And definitely a lot of the media I consume talks from a standpoint that young men are becoming more radical, more conservative, more far right. This is very dangerous. They're becoming more misogynistic. But there is also a set of statistics that says that actually young men's attitudes hasn't changed that much, but that women have skewed far more liberal, far more progressive. What is true? I can't remember where I heard this, but some celebrity or kind of talking head was saying, you know, he has a teenage daughter and a teenage son, and he's trying to drag them both back from the abyss of their sort of extreme influences back into some kind of accord with each other. And like you say, well, we actually can't live without each other. So let's unpack it.
Yeah. On that, when I say the word positive masculinity, what comes to mind?
Security, reliability, strength, both of character, of personality, and of physical strength, because I'm not hewing wood myself, rescuing myself from a burning building, and all of those kind of trad mask roles going on. Physical strength is important. You?
Yeah, I would say all those things. Yeah, I think to your point around strength and character, it's also honor. And, you know, really like being led by a sense of duty is maybe not quite the right word, but yeah, a sense of like an honor, having an honor code. And I think strength, when the apocalypse comes, I do not want to have to go do the hunting or the fire fuel creation.
Listen, if we're fighting zombies and you're relying on me and not 6'6" bodybuilder Phil next door, human race is over. Okay?
But I also think strength when it comes to protection, obviously as opposed to aggression or aggression geared towards women and children. Yeah, I think those are good places to start. But you said that you think that there's some people who think that masculinity and positivity don't go together.
Yes, I definitely feel that there are circles that I am adjacent to whereby anything masculine is deemed toxic. So we have the phrase toxic masculinity. I do think, like we talked about in our last episode, actually you have positive and negative or toxic aspects of femininity. Toxic masculinity is a thing. For example, you used honor, and honor in its positive form, I think, is great. But we all know the term honor killing.
Of course, yeah.
You know, so it depends how it's applied, really. I think in some circles that actually all of masculinity is deemed toxic now. And someone even sent me a internet, like, when someone's written something on a slide on Instagram, which was like, well, I think we should just stop raising men and boys at all. And what they meant was that all boys essentially should be raised as we would raise girls. I mean, it was a very mixed up piece of writing, so I really had to put on my like tinfoil hat to unpack exactly what they were talking about. But the concept was essentially that all masculinity is harmful, therefore all boys must be stripped of their innate nature. And that is the way to make for a better society. It was unhinged. It was there was so many red flags in it. It was like a Formula One rating. But in some extreme progressive circles, yes, people think that all masculinity is negative.
Which is crazy to me for so many reasons, but mainly just because, like you said, we need each other to continue the human race. But it's interesting because then I do think if that is the world, and I'm not, I'm not everywhere on the internet, not even most places on the internet, but if that's the direction things are going, for a certain subsection, then it's not surprising to me that you have young boys growing up who don't know where to look. And if they're looking at something like that says that you're innately a bad person and everything that feels natural about you or to you is wrong, then they're going to look for someone like the dreaded Andrew Tate, who's going to tell them that, no, you are valuable, you are needed, you are necessary. And, while I think he is inherently evil, then, let me show you a world in which you can feel valuable and well-loved and well-wanted.
Yeah, I totally agree. Andrew Tate, for me, people treat as a cause, but is a symptom. It is a symptom of a feeling of lostness in a lot of men, young men, I think predominantly. Correct me if I'm wrong. And we touched on this actually in our religion episodes, whereby, you have groups of men, and when we talked earlier, you have some interesting points, I think, about like where role models live. We have groups of young men whose place in society has either been toxified or kind of eradicated. And it's not my desire today to sort of fly some weird men's rights flag. But society works best when everyone feels valued and has a purpose. I can understand with the backlash of a lot of women's experiences living under the violence of men, living under a lack of freedom in the home. We've talked before, it's actually incredibly recent that a woman could have her own mortgage, could have her own bank account. The predisposition of women in the 60s and 70s to feel that all masculinity, and what I might call aggressive masculinity now, or hyper masculinity, was inherently dangerous. It makes sense, but I feel sometimes we're fighting a battle that was fought. And actually, that's not really what's happening. And we can only obviously talk about the part of the world, the society that we're in, happening today. Here is something I say all the time. People go to where they're listened. If you're worried about the radicalization of young men, then stop ignoring them. People go where they're listened.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's complicated, and I think that obviously there's still a huge problem with male violence towards women.
Agreed.
Which, can't be ignored. But yeah, absolutely.
Although our government likes to try.
Don't they just? But yes, but I think you have to take we as a society have to take joint responsibility for why someone like Andrew Tate became as popular, is as popular as he is. And we have to provide our own solution. I think if you are somebody who thinks that just everything about masculinity is toxic and bad and should be shoved down the toilet, then you're not taking any ownership or responsibility for the fact that half the population, or 49% of the population, is a man. So we have to find something for them to feel good about. That's not just femininity adjacent.
Yeah.
We
don't have a better world by making men more like women.
No.
We both need to find, I think, the most uplifting, positive, purposeful elements of who we are, obviously as individuals, but also as groups, So just in case you missed our last episode, we were talking about how femininity is the kind of role desirable for women in society, or women are told is desirable in society. And of course, masculinity and men are, for me, closer together than femininity and womanhood. But it is still a role. It's still a sort of requirement. And men, to greater and lesser extent, will feel more represented by the masculinity in their society. And I think that will change very much their experiences with women, actually, which we'll get into, and how women experience them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just think we all have a shared responsibility to think about what kind of people we want to be raising, whether they are women or men, and creating a positive way for them to move forward. And it was interesting when I was doing research just on the religion side, a lot of the positive role models that I could find, they often, at least in America, they often had a kind of religious background, or they were a pastor, or they're evangelical. And I was trying to understand why there weren't more secular seeming ones. And I think there was a few things I sort of came across. I'd love to know what you think about this. When you get into a religious society, you kind of have a code of conduct that's given to you. And I think going back to what you were saying around there being a big swath of people who think that masculinity in general is toxic, that means that young boys are not being given, at least from those people, a code of conduct to uphold, right? They're just being told, just behave like a woman, but that doesn't make any sense, right? Like that's not that's not going to like lead to what we want. So if they don't have something to kind of grab onto as what they should be doing, as what that role is for masculinity, then it is going to be easily sort of taken over by somebody who will give that code of conduct. Whether that is that you should be part of a religious code of conduct, or something that is quite toxic, like Andrew Tate.
Yeah, and we were talking about like where those spaces might live, and sports is the only other one I could come up with, really, whereby in a secular sense you have this kind of, you learn to be reliable, you learn to work as a team, you learn about discipline. Discipline is important for everybody, but I think because of the effects of testosterone, men really need to learn discipline and self-control, and again, combined with aggression, with natural strength. Sports can be very good for that, but as you were talking just now, I sort of thought, well, actually, yes, but sports don't really teach moral code in the same way that religion does. I think we're living in an interesting time where people are turning back to religion because our secular society has become quite toxic, or some people would say it's become very toxic. But there are, again, I guess, kind of positive elements to the more religious structure. And let's talk about Christianity, because that's the culture that we grew up in. And negative ones, I understand this fear that, like, actually, hang on, I don't want to return to a time where I have no control over my body. I must stay home and raise children, where the father is the head of the household, where he controls all the finances. And I think there is a understandable fear of that association. I shouldn't jump ahead because we will discuss trad wives up and coming, and we will get into that. But yeah, if men were outside of religion, where is a good space for male development that gives them a sense of purpose, of pride, and like people to look up to?
I would also say I do think that it's important that men be guided by other men.
Agreed.
Just in the same way that I think a dad, or, I love my dad, but you need women to teach girls how to be women too. It shouldn't just come from a man.
Yeah, agreed. We can learn a lot from each other.
Yes.
But
absolutely.
there's some things that women can only learn from women. Yes. Some things that men can only learn from men. Again, I think there are lots of people who would really bristle at that.
But why?
I think it comes down, does it come down to this thing that we actually didn't get into in the last episode, but we did talk about when we were throwing ideas around of what equality means. And does equality mean sameness? Or does it mean...
Yes.
If it doesn't mean sameness, what does it mean? I think we've been on this big drive to say, like, everyone is an individual and everyone is the same.
Inherently very different ideas.
And everything is interchangeable because the individual is all that matters. Obviously, we both agree with individual liberty. But there are realities to being biologically male or female. And therefore, what does that mean when we've existed in a structure previously that has therefore meant one is considered more valid, more important, more human than another, which obviously we disagree with? I think some of that has colored the idea that, like, for me, it's about mutual respect.
I completely agree. And I think maybe that's it. Maybe it's what you were talking about earlier, that if we're approaching this from this lens of, we're still kind of holding on to the fights that have been happening rather than just looking at kind of the facts. I would love for somebody to challenge me, but I would struggle to understand why inherently a boy does not need to be taught some things by a man in the same way that a girl needs to be taught some things by a woman. If you just leave out the baggage of, well, that means that they're going to be pushing patriarchy, or they're going to be pushing submission, or whatever other constructs people might have as fears in their mind, and very valid, valid fears. But I feel I feel very comfortable in saying I do think that boys should be taught they need a space where they are guided into manhood by other men.
You brought up a really interesting point about rites of passage. So we always used to, again, like in smaller societies, when we lived closer to the lands, when we lived in smaller societies, we always had rites of passage for men and for women. And we got rid of a lot of those in our little pocket of the world. But you reminded me of something I was listening to where they said, if we don't have them structured into the society, they get created. And they mentioned things like gang violence, initiation rituals that I think men and women do with each other, but where they're sort of left in spaces where young people get to kind of play out without rules and structures, then they can actually turn quite violent, quite ugly, bad for society. And I thought, gosh, yeah, actually keeping positive coming of age rituals and rites within society is good. And it was silly of us to get rid of those, because some of what's replaced that is violent and toxic and criminal sometimes and bad for the people involved. Like I say, it's a kind of a Lord of the Flies situation going on in some scenarios.
Yeah, completely. But it also means that you sort of developmentally, if you are becoming a man or you are becoming a woman, then you are expected to shoulder certain responsibilities, whether you agree with them or not, that are for the adults, right? Versus if you're never being asked to shoulder responsibility because you never have a rite of passage, then you potentially are just sort of living in perpetual adolescence.
Yeah.
But I don't even know, what would a secular coming of age for a man be? I don't know.
I
need time to think about that one.
I don't know. Answers on a postcard.
Yeah.
So I'm going to mull that over. No, maybe we'll come back to that. That's a really good question. So do you remember when we were younger, we had Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus?
Sure do.
And that was a very interesting book. I haven't read it for a very long time, so I can't critique it. But are there some things as you've grown up that you have actually come to understand about men that are revelationary for you? I'm happy to kick off if I've thrown you on the spot.
Please do, yeah.
So in our femininity, our womanhood episode, we talked about the busyness of women's minds. And I always think women are constantly kind of assessing each other, the situation, in a way that it makes us quite busy internally. I had this thing with my husband. I used to get really mad at him where I would say, "What are you thinking about?" And he'd say nothing. And I'd assume he was lying. I never in my life have I ever thought about nothing. And I'm not sure many women tend to often, unless they are actively trying to meditate or be mindful, think about nothing. I thought he was lying. But it turns out he's not really. and I think that's something that made me think, oh,
yeah,
okay.
How did you find out he wasn't lying?
Oh, I think as I come to the realization about how busy women mentally tend to be. Did you ever watch Scrubs?
Yeah,
this is
like,
not to do with men and women, but whenever I discuss this, I always think of with the surgeon, what the surgeons think about dun 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 dun, the shiny scalpel, dun 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 dun, down and slice them up. Men have had to navigate, I guess, so many less subcurrents of relationships. So famously, whether you agree with it or not, the understanding is women are relational and men are kind of more like active, like physically active, and women are constantly thinking about other people and stories and feelings and all that kind of stuff. So I can imagine that breeds just a lot more internal peace because you're not fucked about what just the person over there needs something. Is someone upset in the space? Somebody said something yesterday. What do they really mean by that? In general, I don't think men have these internal kind of anguish that goes on constantly.
I think they have some of it, but I think maybe not to the degree that women do for the reasons that we talked about in the last episode. I do think one of the other things that men don't have to think about, though, as much is safety. So I had a conversation with my husband, and I don't think he's going to care that I'm going to say this. But he, the man worked in HR, like he's a good person. He has, never hurt a person, definitely never hurt a woman or a child. But he is 6'4" and he's ex-rugby. And it never occurred to him in the same, like, I'm sure he like thought about it, but it never like deeply occurred to him until I pointed it out that every day of my life since I was a teenager, and since I was preteen, because I had a growth spurt early, so I was 5'10" from the time I was like 12 and a half, that every day I think about safety. I don't just think about all the interpersonal things and what did Judy say last night and yada, yada, yada. I also think about who is around me, what is around me, what are the like, and I'm just wondering about my safety at all points. And that's, I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe if you're a man who's doesn't have the same like physical makeup as Pip, you have to think about it too. Maybe in other cultures, you have to think about it too. But probably on a whole, in the UK and in the US, men don't have to think about it as much as women do.
Yes, you raise a very valid point. And actually, although I was a little bit flippant about the sort of internal mental workings of women's minds when it comes to relationships, that's also based on safety. It's not just to do with, I think, like, even about like childcare, you are constantly thinking about what is the baby doing? What do they need? What does that cry mean? What does this signify? But also the dynamics in the household. When someone gets home, have they had a good day? Have they had a bad day? What are the levels of anger? My husband never perhaps realized until he started listening to me when we were older in our relationship. I think men become more thoughtful about women's experience the older they get. I mean, we all become more thoughtful the older we get. That I would consider a tone of voice to be aggressive, that he would just think he was speaking. And I never realized until we started talking more about safety, like how hypervigilant I am to male tone of voice. And that is also a big part of why we are constantly, I think, assessing tone of voice, relationships, what's happening. Because if you think most violence happens in the home, even without, I'm lucky I wasn't raised in a violent home, that we are raised around men who are our natural predators, statistically. You have to monitor your safety all the time. You're so right about that. And that creates also, this hypervigilance all the time. You cannot relax.
Yeah. But I think going back to your earlier question, one of the things that I find fascinating about men is this concept that I heard on a podcast with a sort of like, I don't know how he describes himself. He's like ex-army, Green Beret, and he's like he considers himself like a positive masculinity influencer. And his assumption is that men see love as loyalty. And I think actually, like, once he said that, I was like, oh. And then I just started looking at the world and started thinking about that for the next few days. And I think he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because I think you see it. I've never understood why in most relationships I've been in, if a man if you cheat on a man, then that's a really big deal, right? In a way that's maybe not as big a deal to a woman as opposed to like cheating mentally. And I think we talked about this in our relationship episode a little bit, right? But it's there's different dynamics there. And I think that's around loyalty, right? It's around physical loyalty. And he also brings up, which now looking back, I can also see in my life, that if you might have a partner who has a friend and you just don't understand why they're friends with this person, but he's like, but they will have done something for your partner at some point in their life and they are just now loyal to them till the end.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'd never thought about that in male-to-male relationships until you brought it up today. It is something that I thought about in male-to-female relationships and what men look for in women. And I have been previously found this quite toxic, actually, because it inculcates in women this desire or this goal to put up with any kind of treatment. Like, he can sleep with someone else, but he loves me. I'm the first girl. I'm the one he loves the most. He can stay out all night, but as long as he comes home to me, which obviously I find unbearable and insufferable. And there's this phrase I'd never heard of. An ex said this to me, but then I started seeing it like it's even in an LL Cool J song. The man doesn't choose the woman chooses the man. Have you heard this? I don't know if we did this in our relationship episode or not.
Oh, well, my mom has an interesting theory on this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You say the man doesn't choose the woman chooses the man. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my mom's, well, you want to finish and then I'll tell you.
Well, so I'm going to say once I clocked the loyalty thing, this made so much sense because what it means is the woman has decided that for that man, she will put up with X, Y, and Z. It's her commitment to the relationship over and above what he might do day to day that cements the bond. And then from the man's perspective, I love this woman because she's loyal. But I'd never thought about that man to man before, but when you bring up this, like, the annoying best friend who you just hate and can't understand why do your partner keeps this loser around who's like a complete liability. But what does your mum say?
Oh,
I love your mum's wisdom.
No, I love Gina's. She said, it's interesting, it's different. Well, maybe not. Her thing is that a man will get married when he's ready.
Yes.
And he will just get married to whoever he's with.
Bing, Sex in the City.
Yeah, exactly. As opposed to a woman will decide, this is the person I want to marry. And then, I guess further to your point, she will like stay with him, stick up, do whatever is needed so that becomes the person that she marries.
Yeah.
And there's just not the thought process for men.
So, taking this concept of male-to-male loyalty, and if you're a man listening to this, we would love to know because we're speculating, obviously, we're not guys. So, we love to hear what you think. I wonder how this marries with... So there are a couple of theories where I've dipped into evolutionary biology that I found illuminating. Two of them I think are relevant to today's chat. The first one is that men tend to, by and large, operate in dominance hierarchies. So I heard this and I thought, oh, that's okay. Maybe that seems a little simplistic. I'm going to ask, and obviously this is anecdotal because I asked three men. Whether or not this is true. And the first thought I had was, is that a heterosexual male thing? So I asked two of my gay male besties, both quite different to each other. One, like very effeminate, often presents as female, who works in entertainment, spends a lot of time around women. Another one, a little bit more masculine, I would say. Both of them were like, yes, 100% yes. I said this to my husband. He's like, yes, 100% yes. My husband's a chef. I mean, this is a whole, like the army, this is all dominance hierarchies. And whilst it is changing, both of those are still very male environments as well. And I thought that was fascinating. So based on what? And obviously, like, physical strength was the one that I first thought of because it's just sort of the obvious, especially if you're thinking about this probably goes back to like caveman times. But not just that, like, obviously you have strength, status, money, looks within the gay male community. Looks came up a lot. And I just thought it was really interesting that these three very different men were just like, yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. Versus, do you think does that track with women, do you think?
Not in the same way. I think women, as we talked about, are much more communal.
Yeah.
It's about strength and numbers. It's about, we talked about the positive and negative benefits of sisterhood and solidarity in that way. I think men are lonelier than women in that way. And so I guess what you said about the loyalty thing, I'm sure there are many facets to this that have not occurred to me, but I thought, actually, I suppose if you're talking about, like, again, battle, hunting, militarily, all of these roles that men would have had to have fulfilled, for huge swathes of our evolution as human beings, loyalty is vital if you're going into battle.
Safety.
You need to trust someone's going to have your back.
So then just you use the word which then sprang to mind, loneliness.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of chat right now around male loneliness and the loneliness epidemic. And apparently, now 15% of men that were polled recently, in a poll that I can't quote, were, so it's obviously based on fact, claim they don't have any, or feel they don't have any close friends. What's your sort of like take on that? How does this feel to you?
It rings true. I guess there's the element of like, who's responsible for that? Am I right in saying that when divorce happens and when people are widowed, women tend to live longer than men do?
Sure.
And some of that, I think, is to do with women are very used to being the ones who maintain relationships. So after divorce, men tend to do better financially, but women do better socially and in their mental health.
Interesting.
And within the family, I'd love to know if this is your experience, but certainly even with myself, it annoys the hell out of me, and I'm constantly bringing this up with my husband. It's the women who are like, shall we see if we can go and see grandma next week? We haven't seen these friends for a while. Like, it's your mum's birthday. Have you got her a card? Did you call your sister today? Women are the sort of diary keepers, the relationship maintainers, the social lubricants that go on. So men are never trained to do that. They're not used to doing that. So when they are in spaces without women, or they lose their wife or their partner, or they get divorced, most men can become very solitary and quite isolated and quite lonely. I have sympathy for the cause, but the cure, I feel like, I don't know. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I also always wonder about, obviously I don't want anybody to feel lonely, but unless you're like Hannibal Lecter, but I always wonder too, because about women and loneliness, and is this just something that exists maybe in equal measure or maybe in greater measure, but just isn't considered as valid or as important? Like when we talk to various friends who'd had children, one of the biggest feedback that I got after our, sort of no children episode was how lonely they felt, even though they had good friends and good family who were around them, who were sort of supportive. They still just felt this like intense sense of loneliness. And I just think we also live in a world where we're all glued to our phone, which we all know is bad for us, and we all know is ruining our mental health. I don't know. So again, I'm a little bit skeptical about, is this like an actual epidemic we need to be concerned about? Or is this just like the general population in the developed world is having a bit of a problem connecting?
Yeah, I think the second part of that is definitely true. We live lonelier lives. We move away from our families. We have smaller families. Family ties aren't maybe considered super important. So I think, just for a doom spanner in the works, I do think loneliness is part of the human condition.
Yeah.
Like we all struggle to feel whether we're being understood or not. I'm going to guess, and I'm very open to being proved wrong on this, that because, again, this like caregiving, I say burden, but there's actually something also really lovely about it. It's been traditionally women's roles to be the caretaker of the family. I think women probably are better and are either potentially biologically more inclined to think that way, but societally also, given praise for and encouraged to maintain relationship and ties to relationships, that women are probably better at being there for each other. So you bring up the example of some friends we were talking to. I think but the loneliness can be internal. I think you can be lonely in a crowded room.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you polled individuals based on how lonely they felt, whether you would have such a sex difference. But I'm fully prepared to believe that single women are better at maintaining community and relationships than single men are.
I suppose also like you have a little bit, if we look at like the middle class in this country, for example, you have a society where, let's suppose the woman is staying home, or she's there to pick up the kids at the end of school. She's going to meet other moms, usually moms, who are dropping the kids off or picking their kids up from school. And so she kind of can build a little bit of a social network. You go to your pregnancy classes. There's like more, I think there probably are, it seems, I don't, again, have children, but there are more readily available opportunities for kind of moms to connect. And I've found that, we've recently kind of, we're spending a bunch of time outside of London and we don't have children. So all of my husband's friends who have kids have all bonded and like found these groups, usually through the mom, who are their other sort of like school friends, right? But we don't have that. So we don't have the ability to like go, certainly can't like go to a school side and just be like, you seem like a cool parent. That
would be weird.
So there's, you kind of, I think, when you have children, you have a little bit of a more built-in social network. And then again, sort of speaking about this slice of society. And then I think within that, though, you probably do have more opportunity for women to connect than men to, right? Because where the men usually won't be the ones, as a generalization, picking up the kids after school. So they might meet the dads, they might get along, they might not.
Yeah, but they go to work.
Yeah, they go to work, and then I guess they like socialize with people there. But how many friends did you have that you worked with?
Loads!
Oh, really?
Yes!
Tracking for me, I hated most people I ever worked with.
Men, call your friends.
Yeah.
Okay?
PSA.
Yeah, this is something my husband talks about being much better at later in life. He said, I didn't really consider, loves his friends. He lives in a different country to a lot of them. And so sort of took for granted the relationships without needing to maintain them. And he says the older he gets, he now actively tries to reach out in a way that I think you and I would find more normal amongst the women. Whether you have like 3 best friends or like 20 best friends. I don't think anyone has 20 best friends, but whatever. You try and keep in touch in a way that I'm not sure your average guy has done previously. I do think maybe this is changing a bit with younger generations. But I'm going to say on a limb, I think when people talk about the male loneliness epidemic, they're talking about men outside of family structures.
Fine. Yeah.
And I guess you raise the point like with, whether the children are there or not and whether that impacts it.
Just moving on from that, I think you brought up an interesting point earlier when we were chatting through around men's spaces.
Yes.
And so if we go on from the loneliness epidemic, not that I think that the demeaning of men's spaces is like the root cause of the loneliness epidemic, but yeah, talk to me about that because I didn't know some of this.
Oh, yeah. So there's this kind of row going on over what is an acceptable men's space, I guess.
Yeah.
And so there's like the real world and then there's like the online anger group.
Yeah.
And so in the online anger men's rights group, it's all very much like men can't have anything anymore. Women have to be everywhere. We're not allowed single sex spaces. Screw you, bitches. And women's counterpoint to that is always your men's spaces were government, boardrooms, like all of the facets that control society, and we were relegated to the home. Coming out of the extremes into the everyday situation, I think it's probably true that because of the backlash, rightfully, of male domination of public life, all men's spaces got lumped together as terrible. And actually, maybe that did, I don't like the term too far, but maybe that did go too far. And I mean, I hope I'm not going to totally get this story wrong, but this centered, I think, on a local news article somewhere that sort of blew up a bit on X about a retired men's like carpentry local group where men got together and like whittled tables or whatever, made ashtrays, just something like wholesome and lovely. Because legally, I think you can't have any single-sex men's spaces now, willing to be corrected on that. And the group of women decided that they also wanted to join. And then this became like for men and women. And actually the Boy Scouts is mixed sex as well.
Is it?
Yes, I believe so. And maybe there's time in apparently this crisis of masculinity that we're in to reassess that, okay, look, we are in a relatively good position. Women are dominating some institutions, are graduating from higher educations and numbers never seen before. Women's income has gone right up. You know, you and I are blah, 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 tick, 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 tick. That actually maybe we can stop having this knee-jerk reaction to benign male spaces because there are just, I like a space where I can talk without some guy breathing down and my neck and talking nonstop and giving me his opinions all the fucking time. And I'm sure men sometimes just want to whittle some wood together and burp and fart when they like.
I know.
God, why does it feel so wrong to say that?
I know it does. It sort of like inherently feels like you are letting the female side down.
Yes, I feel like I've betrayed the system by saying that actually maybe some men's spaces are great.
Yeah, it's true. Also, I feel like in our last episode, we maybe weren't as like positive about women only, like women getting together with other women, which I am also very supportive of.
Oh yeah, I hope that didn't come across. One thing I love about burlesque is that we got rid of a lot of our kind of female bonding rituals, I think. And actually, do you know what? Slap me around the face and call me Judy. I like getting together with a bunch of my gal friends, doing my makeup, painting my nails, checking out each other's outfits and getting ready to go out. And sometimes this is even better than the night out.
The getting ready party. Yes, it is the best. It's so much better.
Yes. And I'm in full belief that one of the big things that attracted women to studying something like burlesque is that it's an acceptable getting together and hanging out and grooming. I think grooming's probably been a part of like a human bonding ritual since forever.
Is that the term we use for it?
Yeah, that's also a terrible word to use the word grooming in a different context. Yes, no, I have also used it correctly. It is an unfortunate crossover.
Oh, goodness. Well, yeah.
I'm going to bring something else in here because I do think it will color our perceptions of our ideas about men. But I read The Feminine Mystique a while ago. I listen to it because I, since COVID, have a total incapacity to read unless I'm on holiday. And that Feminine Mystique, I think I've brought up before, but is the book that analyzes the sort of 50s period where you have this idea of like the housewife who goes crazy, like the Stepford wife idea, like that she's stuck in the home and this is sent her mad, basically. And Betty Friedan analyzed this idea in her book, The Feminine Mystique. And in it, she talks about all of the facets that came together to create a scenario where you had women living vicariously only through family. One of which is a famous anthropologist at the time called Margaret Mead, who studied Indigenous people and societies all around the world. And she talks about in the South Sea Islands, whereby you have obviously this very kind of gendered existence where little girls, like little 3-year-old girls, like thrust out their tummies to like emulate being pregnant. And women, when they're older, are named after their children that they've had. So you would be mother of Sandra.
Come on.
That's the most exciting name I could think of at the moment. Or if your children passed away, they had a title Mother Bereft. And this really blew my mind because I felt like I suddenly understood the world a bit more, to connect to this discussion of my sister, where she was wondering, like, how did we end up in a patriarchy every time? We have had, apparently, matriarchal societies previously, but pretty much absolutely everywhere we exist in a patriarchy. And I suddenly thought, well, yeah, of course. Because if women gained their place in society through being, but men don't have, like, for men to justify their place in society, they had to do it through doing. So you were the fastest hunter, you were the strongest fighter, you were sort of freed up because you weren't raising children to do the other things that created the structure of the society. And obviously, who wouldn't? If you are the one that creates the value system in society, would you not make it around the thing that you excelled at? And this explains to me totally why we ended up in patriarchies, because men had the active force in how society was structured. But also this idea that we do sort of still, to greater or lesser extents, praise girls for being quiet, being pretty, being kind, being compassionate, being accommodating. And we praise boys for doing. And this explains a lot of kind of manhood and masculinity to me as well.
Yeah. No, I know. When you brought that up before when we were chatting, I thought it was fascinating because I never thought about it like that before, but I think you are absolutely correct. It's really interesting. But I think also just going back to what we sort of started this conversation with, again, I'm not a parent, but if you asked me what is a 13-year-old or 15-year-old boy now being told what is a positive thing to go out and do, I don't know that I could tell you.
No.
Because I think everything comes with like baggage, right? Well, you're telling him to be a father. Okay, like, I don't know. Are we now? Like, you're telling him to go out. Yeah. What are you telling him?
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. And so I have a lot of sympathy, with this idea that, like, sorry, what are we raising boys to be? I think it also puts me in mind of just purpose in general. Like this, like men could sort of create value for themselves by doing. I wish women absorbed a bit more, because finding purpose it's almost like we've kind of taken away from one and given to the other, and we have this unbalance. One needs more of, balance.
How do you feel about when it comes to masculinity and this concept is sort of like a strong silent type or stiff upper lip? Do you consider that a positive aspect of masculinity or a negative one?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I watched for my sins, or ended up on the algorithm being shown a discussion with Piers Morgan, who I don't love. I'll say that right now. But like a stop clock. Can't tell the right time twice a day. Where he was having a discussion about toxic masculinity with a young man. And this young man was listing off toxic masculinity traits. And he said stoicism, which we mentioned before. And Piers Morgan said, which I do have to agree with, what do you mean? Why is stoicism bad? Stoicism is the ability to hold it together in crisis.
Sounds okay to me.
Yeah, this sounds great. And
good thing to have around.
If you're going to create this kind of, if we're going to try and think of the idea of provider, I think in a positive, beneficial way, then yes, actually, Stoicism is an important part of it. Obviously, we had this kind of repression of feelings that it was believed that then spill out into aggression and violence. Men couldn't cope with their feelings, so they became violent. Therefore, we must encourage men to express their feelings at all times, and this will somehow protect against male violence. But I'm not sure it has. So in the right context, positive Stoicism is great for both sexes, to be honest.
Totally. I also find it really interesting that it has a negative connotation because I don't know that much about it. But obviously, if you think about who Marcus Aurelius was and when he was writing all of his thoughts, which some of them, obviously became this, he was the most powerful man in the world.
Is this where the idea of Stoicism comes from?
I believe so.
Okay.
I mean, I guess we can edit this out if that's not true. But my understanding is that, Marcus Aurelius wrote a whole book on thoughts, and it was the thoughts about how to control yourself and control your emotions in times of crisis as the most powerful man on the planet at the time. So this is not like a weak thought, or Stoicism is not, it comes from a place of great strength mentally.
Yes. And actually, something I think has got mixed up here, because what you've made me think of this idea of like men not being in touch with emotions. Well, anger is an emotion, actually. And there's been a lot of critique, which sort of made me laugh about like, women are emotional only because men have rebranded anger successfully as not an emotion.
So true.
But, your definition of Stoicism, being in control of your emotions, means being in control of your anger, your aggression. None of us should be whims to our feelings at all times. Actually, I think, a sophisticated human being is aware of their feelings and masters them.
And I think part of that mastery is, if you're successful with it, is around being able to harness it and then use it for positive change, right? So, and to me, that comes out as communication. I don't value in a man the concept that you never share your emotions, never talk about your emotions. I'm not looking for you to be, just, like rampantly angry or sad or happy or anything else, right? Just at the whim of the emotion. But I would love for a man to be in control of being able to communicate around what he's feeling and how it affects him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's definitely something in the 17 years or something as we've been together. I guess for me, balancing my desire to be like, oh my God, if he's not saying anything, something must be terribly wrong. And then just spiraling off into this crazy like paranoia and this sort of upset. But at the same time, him understanding that if I ask you what's wrong and you say nothing and clearly something is wrong, then that is not good for the relationship either. You have to be able to communicate, even if it's to say, I'm a bit upset about, I don't know, work or something that's happened. And actually I'm going to feel better by not thinking about it. At least I understand the context for the non-communication.
Yeah, completely. It's so interesting that a young boy would see Stoicism as negative.
Yes, but I think that's quite common.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's to do with this like repression of feelings has been always bad.
Fascinating.
There's a time and a place for this.
Amen. Amen.
And also, I'm pointing at you because you're the one I can see. But this isn't necessarily aimed at me. I will challenge all of our female listeners. In a time of crisis, if a man starts crying, are you going to think that's good?
No. In a time of crisis, you want a man who is going to be strong. And it was interesting. So there's like positive. I will look his name up and I will put a link in the chat text. But he has had a successful business career and, talked at various, important government functions and universities, et cetera, et cetera. But he said that when he comes into a room where he is teaching young men, the thing which he finds they respect the most is that he was a Green Beret. And Green Berets are taught, they're like, the ultimate in the American Army for going into a crisis situation and knowing how to handle it.
Yeah.
And that's what people respond to. And I think I would respond to that too, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it's nice. It's nice to have that trait because you feel protected, right? With femininity and masculinity, I think for almost every attribute we've looked at, there's a negative swing and there's a positive swing. But men are, on a whole, stronger physically, and masculinity as what sort of society expects from them, strength is part of that.
Yeah.
And it can be a negative, and a very unchecked negative, unfortunately, but it can also be a real positive.
Yeah.
An important positive.
Agreed. It's a negative, isn't it, when it's uncontrolled and when it's, cruel, sadistic, really. Yeah. And that is why, actually, men, maybe more than women, need disciplined environments. I wonder if we've got rid of some of those because, again, we think of, military, it's a disciplined environment. Because women, I'm not sure, actually do well in disciplined environments. I wonder, thinking out loud, I could be wrong, whether because of that we've demonized all disciplined environments. But I actually think men flourish much better in this. And so many times I've listened to a man who maybe has had a difficult start in life or been through crisis and has turned his life around to become successful. There will always be, I took up martial arts. I became a boxer. I found religion, which can bring its own type of discipline. We can argue your face means we can
negatives of that.
I went to the military because it's about, isn't it, like controlling the testosterone, the aggression, the physicality, the strength, and channeling it. And I think maybe as society became more dominated by women, we made an error in undervaluing the role of that.
Yeah, I think you could absolutely be correct. I think it depends on sort of what specifically, but I know Pip is, so my husband is played rugby when he was growing up and he loves it. But one of the things that he always talked about was as a young teenage boy, he had so much pent up aggression and just energy and testosterone, and he needed to get it out. And you could do, you're basically beating somebody up on the pitch, which is all totally okay. But there's a referee and you are not allowed to yell at the referee. You're not allowed to argue with the referee. You're not allowed to, just like a drill sergeant, you're not allowed to talk back to the referee. And you just have to be polite and go along with whatever they say. I hate the concept of going along with what somebody says who's in a place of authority, but I do appreciate that. And to him, that was his form of discipline around just learning, like what you said, finding a positive outlet to sort of channel that energy and fall into a hierarchical structure and basically turn your emotions into something where they're not just running rampant.
Yeah, totally agreed. You asked a question earlier that I thought was interesting about when we talk about sort of men having these structures, these hierarchies amongst themselves, what happens with men who are near the top of these kind of pecking orders, whatever they're based on. The internet speaking me the concept of the beta males.
Yeah.
And I find women's relationships to men who maybe don't rank highly in masculinity quite interesting. I say earlier, I find sometimes the nice guy, we all know the nice guy type, which is a man who's kind of can be quite soft, a bit more feminine, says what a good guy he is, how much he loves women, who doesn't seem to want to hang around with the boys and the jokes and doesn't take part in all of this kind of toxic masculinity. That's the people who are serial killers.
Yeah. Just before we go into that, I grew up for a large chunk of my childhood in Palo Alto, in California, where Apple and Facebook and Google and all sorts of other companies kind of stem from. And in that environment, you can have very successful, I would consider very masculine men who are not the kind of ex-army beret, do you know what I mean? So it's not in my mind, it's not necessarily that your masculine strength has to represent as you are the absolute strongest, you're the most physically dominant person in the room.
Yeah, fair.
But I think it's around the kind of strength that you have. I mean, obviously, just in the same way, I'm sure my husband would love if I take care of my body. I love it if he takes care of his body, but But ultimately, it's not about the strength. It's about the strength of the protector and the other elements that we've talked about. Just do you know what I mean? So to me, it's not that everything is about always trying to achieve that, because you do have very successful and I would say very masculine men, in my opinion, who they're not necessarily the strongest man.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Physically.
Take it through other means.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, you raise a good point. Is this I'm not set on my opinion on this, so we're sort of talking out loud. I'm very happy to hear other points of view on this. I guess if we say high status and low status, then men who are sort of deemed as successful men in whatever capacity that might mean.
Yes.
I feel like
No, go ahead.
Sometimes I feel like women are being conditioned to retain empathy for men who have actually sort of not won the esteem of other men.
Yes.
And to feel that they're therefore closer to us. But sometimes I find they hate women far more than your patriarch, your CEO, your bodybuilder.
Yeah. Oh, completely. And I feel sometimes that, again, like the concept that a man might want, to take care of like his wife in a way that she could stay at home with the kids if she wants. This is absolutely demonized as you're like a horrible person, versus going back to what you're saying about like the sort of like nice guys who are super like, pro women, everything. I just think it often, I mean, we're generalizing here, but I feel like it can certainly sometimes come across as some weird manipulation where they're just trying different avenues to get into your pants.
Yeah.
That's all this is.
Yes.
It's not actually, I don't usually believe that they are so much more feminist than the rest.
Oh, no. And every woman knows deep down that this is true. With men who say who make a big song and dance. I think we did decide that. Who make a big song and dance about being nice and feminist are always the ones who are like, what's wrong? You always say you want a nice guy, you stupid bitches.
Yes.
Always go for the jocks and the bad boys. Oh,
like as if you owe them something.
Yes, for not immediately punching you in the face. Yeah. They're just going to punch you in the face later on after they've incapacitated you because they're not physically strong enough to go to war.
But I think you made a good point around, again, sort of thinking about hierarchy. I do think that obviously, physical strength is one thing, but I do think that in the way that I've observed men out in the wild, they do respond to other things. They respond to other sort of high, low status points around success and around, masculinity. That's not just to do with brute strength. And if...
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. And if they haven't gathered the successful appreciation of their peers, maybe we should all be wary of them. I don't know. Red flag.
Oh my God, total red flag.
Are we being really horrible right now? I don't know.
This is one of the uncomfortable truths maybe we can bring over from the femininity episode. So the radical feminist take would be, I'm not saying this is exactly my opinion, but again, to place it into a kind of structure that has been analyzed by some women, if men exist in kind of hierarchies, men who are higher up the societal food chain amongst their group would feel more secure. If you are lower down the pecking order, well, women are the people you will look down on. Not obviously, this is an observation, not an endorsement, to be clear. And so, again, like, I have far more trust with men who are more comfortable in their masculinity, whatever that means, that I have less to fear from them than men who seem to really struggle with their place. And that doesn't mean being hyper masculine. So maybe I should say manhood, actually, because if we're talking about these as kind of like societal kind of things that we should be versus how we really are, men who are more comfortable in how their manhood expresses a far safer option to me because of this inclination. This is what I guess the radical feminists would say, this inclination for them to be superior to somebody.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point. Terrifying, but I can see that being absolutely true.
It is terrifying.
But I do think that that's it. It's around, sort of the comfort in your manhood. But icky.
Be wary of the nice guys.
Yeah.
They always think you owe them something.
Oh, it's such a horrible thing. I got that all the time when I was younger. Oh, you fuck all.
Yeah.
I don't know you anything. It's ridiculous. Entitlement.
Yes. Yes.
That's a not positive form of masculinity. Entitlement.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? You think about men as like doers, traditionally. Yeah. You had to earn your entitlement. Where did this come in? I suppose over time, men feel by their sex alone, they are therefore entitled. Where does that come from?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of entitlements people in our culture have.
True.
But I don't know. That's a good question. Because you're right. What have you done to earn it?
Yes.
I don't know if I feel better about the world after this chat.
Oh, yeah. No, I do, because I think that if we don't have some honest conversations about positive roles for men, and again, I think sometimes our side can be, drag you into this when I say our side, but like, you know, kind of certain types of feminism, because it's certainly not all feminism, can be very big on like, yeah, fucking whatever, like, doesn't matter, like, resign men to their history bins. Like, they are useless. Good. Keep doing that. See how well the world turns out. Like, when you tell men that they are useless, do you think that works out better for women in the long run? I guarantee you it absolutely does not.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that actually we can come together to have a proper discussion, especially like we started with this episode. We have to get on.
It's true.
Yeah. We have to find an accord together to exist with mutual respect. I'd rather be part of a positive conversation about that, even if it might feel good under the guise of a kind of inherited revenge to feel like, but it's not going to end well.
No, it's absolutely not. And ultimately, even though we are not individual parents, I think we are part of society, and we are therefore part of like the larger collective that is responsible for writing the narrative of how we raise girls and boys and what we want them to become. And yeah, I think we need to encourage men to be good men. Yeah. And find a way forward for that to be a really obvious message that's a really digestible and understandable. And we all know what that means. Yeah. And we get behind it.
Yeah. We can all contribute to society positively, and we all should be allowed to.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. We love making this podcast and we really want it to grow. So if you enjoyed listening to us,
please like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. Also, feel free to comment, DM us, open up a conversation. The whole point of this podcast is to be in support of having open lines of communication and debate, and we would love to hear from you.
Listen to the sirens.
Woo!